In a Phoenix courtroom in 1993, prosecutors called a witness with no eyes, no mouth, and roots. It was a palo verde tree. And what it said helped send a man to prison for murder. Here's how 2 dry seed pods in a pickup bed became the first plant ever to testify. It starts on the far west edge of the city, at a construction site nobody had reason to visit. May 1992. Denise Johnson, 22 years old, found in the dirt, strangled, her clothes and purse gone. No weapon at the scene, no blood trail. The desert had been baking the site for 2 days. Detectives walked a crime scene with almost nothing in it. Gravel, tire ruts, a few scrubby trees, silence. Somebody had driven her out there in the dark and driven away clean. That was the whole theory. Then they found a pager lying in the dirt near her body. Cheap plastic, completely ordinary. They traced the number. It came back to a man named Mark Allen Bogan. Bogan didn't run and didn't stay quiet. He sat down with detectives and told them a story. He'd picked her up, he said. They had sex in his truck. Then she stole his wallet. She grabbed the pager on her way out, he said, and ran off into the night. And the construction site? He'd never been there. Not that night, not ever, not once in his life. That last sentence is the one that would eventually convict him. Flat, unhedged, and recorded on tape. Because a pager can be explained away. Anything portable can. Things get lost, lent, dropped, carried off. So the case stalled. Then somebody thought to look in the bed of Bogan's pickup truck. 2 seed pods. Dry, curled, the color of an old paper bag. Blown in from anywhere. Which meant nothing. Leave a truck bed open in Arizona, and it collects half the desert by Tuesday. But a detective named Charlie Norton had just walked the crime scene. And he'd noticed a tree. A palo verde. Thin green trunk, feathery branches. And a raw gouge in the bark, bright and fresh. Something heavy had backed into it hard enough to peel the bark open and snap a branch clean. So Norton stood there with a bag of seed pods in his hand, looking at a wounded tree. And he asked a question no American investigator had ever asked out loud, because nobody had needed to. Could anyone prove those pods came from that exact tree? Not that species. That one. Because everybody already knew they were palo verde pods. Half of Phoenix is planted with palo verdes. Species was useless. He needed the individual. This trunk, at this address, and no other. It's the difference between knowing a call came from your area code and knowing it came from your number. Norton started phoning universities. Most people were polite about it and told him it couldn't be done. Eventually he reached Timothy Helen Jarris, a plant geneticist at the University of Arizona in Tucson. Helen Jarris worked on crops. Corn, mostly. Breeding programs. Nobody had ever called his lab about a homicide. His honest answer was that no method existed for this, because no one had ever tried it. Then he said he'd take a run at it anyway. He had roughly 6 weeks. Here's the problem he'd just accepted, and it's stranger than it first sounds. Human DNA testing already had years of groundwork by 1992. Standard markers. Published data. Known error rates. For palo verde trees there was none of that. No marker set. No database. No baseline whatsoever. Worse, nobody actually knew whether 2 palo verde trees differed enough to be told apart at all. Desert trees in the same wash often descend from a small handful of parents. They can be near copies. If palo verdes turned out to be genetically bland, the pods proved nothing and the tree stayed silent. So step 1 wasn't testing the evidence. Step 1 was finding out whether the question had an answer. He used a technique called RAP-D. The acronym is uglier than the idea underneath it. You take very short scraps of synthetic DNA, called primers, with sequences picked essentially at random. You drop them in a tube with the plant's DNA, and let them go hunting for matching spots. Wherever 2 primers happen to land close together on the same strand, a copying reaction fires between them. Everything in that gap gets photocopied millions of times over. Everything outside it stays invisible. Then you run the tube out across a gel, and the copies sort themselves by size into bands. What you end up with looks like a supermarket barcode. Not a portrait of the tree, a pattern of stripes. And here's the mechanism that makes it work. Mutations. Single letters in the code, changed at random. 1 letter flips where a primer used to stick, and that stripe vanishes from the barcode. Another flip creates a brand new landing site, and a stripe appears that its parents never had. Nobody designed any of this. It's the accumulated typing errors of every ancestor the tree ever had. Which means the barcode isn't a description of a palo verde. It's a record of one specific family's accidents. So Helen Jarris needed trees to compare against. Police fanned out and collected palo verde samples across the county. Dozens of them. Roadsides, parking lots, dry washes. Plus every single palo verde standing at the crime scene. The scene trees were tagged and numbered. The one with the fresh gouge was labeled PV30. He ran them all. And the barcodes came back different. Clearly, obviously different, tree to tree. Palo verdes turned out to be wildly variable, more genetic scatter than he'd ever seen in a crop field. That was the first real moment. Not a match yet, just proof that the question had an answer. So he turned to the 2 pods from the truck bed. Same primers, same gel, same read. The barcode from those pods lined up with PV30, stripe for stripe, straight down the gel. And it matched nothing else. Not the trees across town, not the other trees standing at the scene. 2 dead seed pods rattling in a pickup bed suddenly had an address. That address was the murder site. If that just changed what you thought evidence could be, that's exactly what this channel is for. Stick around. Except a photo of a gel isn't proof, it's a claim. And the defense understood that perfectly. Every forensic method eventually faces one question. How do we know you can't be fooled? Human DNA had an answer: decades of proficiency testing. Helen Jarvis had 6 weeks and a single case. So the prosecution did something quietly brutal. Before trusting the method, they decided to test the scientist. They sent him a fresh batch of pod samples, labeled only with numbers. He was told nothing else. What he didn't know was that they'd slipped duplicates into the set. 2 samples from one tree, differently numbered. If his technique was just noise, those duplicates would come back as strangers, and he'd never notice. He ran the whole blind set, and reported which samples came from which trees. He caught the duplicates, same tree, same barcode, flagged as identical without anyone telling him to look. And the genuinely different trees, he called different. Not one false match anywhere in the set. That result is what carried the evidence into court. Not the match itself, but proof the match was earned. Bogan's lawyers fought it hard, and honestly, they had the strongest argument available to them. This wasn't a technique with a track record. It was a method invented for this trial, by one man. Courts have a standard for that. New science has to be more than clever. It has to be reliable. The judge held a hearing, listened to both sides, and ruled the tree evidence admissible. So in 1993, a corn geneticist from Tucson took the witness stand in a first-degree murder trial. He held up the barcode from PV30, and the barcode from the pods in Bogan's truck bed. And he told the jury, in plain language, that they came from the same individual plant. A witness that couldn't be threatened, bribed, coached, or talked into doubting itself a year later. Everything else in that case was somebody's word against somebody's word. The tree was the only witness with nothing at stake. Now remember what Bogan had said on tape before anyone had ever heard of a seed pod. He'd never been there. The pods didn't accuse him of killing anyone. They only broke that one sentence. But once he'd been at that site, the wallet story and the pager story lost the ground they stood on. The jury convicted him of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. He appealed. The Arizona Supreme Court upheld the conviction, and upheld the plant evidence along with it. That ruling is why the case still gets taught. After Bogan, botanical DNA had a precedent to stand on. Since then, plant evidence has put cars in specific fields and bodies in specific patches of woods. Pollen grains, seeds, algae, the bacteria in a shovelful of soil. All of it gets read the same way now. And here's the part worth keeping, which isn't really about trees at all. Bogan managed everything he thought was watching him. He handled the wallet. He kept his story consistent. What he never accounted for was the scenery. The parts of a place too ordinary to count as witnesses. Every location has that layer. Things that record you precisely because nobody, including you, ever considers them. He left her somewhere he'd chosen for having nothing in it. That was the miscalculation. Denise Johnson was 22. The tree she was left beside is the reason anyone answered for it at all. A man swore he had never stood in that dirt, and the dirt remembered him anyway. Subscribe, and the next one's already waiting, the fingerprint. The FBI matched to an innocent man, and defended for weeks. Cases like this deserve to be remembered. Thanks for sitting with this one.